children, and welcome back to Longbox of the Damned! Ooh, and would you look at this? We seem to have ourselves some new accommodations. A new crypt to call my own. But while this location is new, as we see with our first tale of the month, everything old is new again. Last Halloween, we ended with a tie-in to Secret Wars that pitted the robots of Ultron versus our beloved Marvel zombies. At least until they decided that really all monsters share the thing that unites us all: killing people! So it was really a tale about cyborg zombies, which is always appreciated, but I think that people would like Marvel zombies as a true threat on their own, don't you think? In Secret Wars, the world has become a patchwork of different parallel universes, all smashed together, with one devastated region being home to the Marvel zombies, the Deadlands. Meet Commander Elsa Bloodstone, hard-ass defender of the wall that keeps out the zombie hordes, who will shoot you dead equally for being a zombie as she will for you spilling her tea. Although, to be fair, it was really good tea. After an attack by a teleporting zombie, Elsa finds herself stranded in the middle of the Deadlands, with her only company, a bald little girl who has lost her memory. She has but 6 rounds left in her joy cannon, no communicator to summon help, and the undead around every corner. The two are surely going to perish. Nice day for it, though. Throughout the story, we get flashbacks to Elsa's life. For those unaware, Elsa Bloodstone is the daughter of Ulysses Bloodstone, an immortal monster hunter with a strange power gem embedded in his chest. This Elsa is based more on the next wave Agents of Height version of the character, where Ulysses was a brutal man who abused his children by forcing them at a young age to become monster hunters themselves. Compassion of any variety, even pity for him, was a weakness. No distractions, no wants, nothing but the mission. Speaking of missions, a mutant soldier comes by and meets Elsa, offering to take the child to safety, which Elsa accepts, if only to get the little Mueller to stop wasting her bullets. Unfortunately, she soon discovers that it was a trick, a shape-shifting zombie who only wanted to take a meal off her hands. Pretty clever for the zombies, actually. And that's because they're well fed, with a strung-up Deadpool whom they continually feed off of to keep their minds operating. The zombies have indeed taken a bite out of the kidnapped child, but for some reason, the meat has not spoiled. No zombie plague for the wee one. Which makes her more than a little interesting, eh? Upon rescuing her, with some unexpected bloodstone power, she tries to get the child to kill Deadpool and put him out of his misery. But it is then that she has a revelation about her own life and the old bastard who raised her. Children should be children. Which is why, my children, I'm all too happy to share with you tales of ghosts and goblins. We all love to get a little scared when we're children. All the while, a mysterious man in tatters and rags has been pursuing the two, staying well out of distance, until finally they reach the shoreline, and he reveals himself, Ulysses Bloodstone! Or rather, another universe version of him. He has been killing off all of the duplicate Bloodstones and taking their otherworldly gems, collecting them all as part of his body, regenerating himself. He has come for Elsa's Bloodstone, which is not in her, but rather is the child herself. All that power imbued within a form of Elsa's lost childhood. Her father was a bully and a monster too, and she is more than happy to put an end to his unique form of evil. Power must be held with those with the empathy to use it right, and she has enough power and empathy now to do something with it. Instead of killing him, she redeems him, turning him alive again and offering him a second chance for humanity. although they do have many, many zombies to kill along the way for that humanity. Secret Wars Marvel Zombies is one of the greatest books holding the title, giving you a combination of the joy of zombie killing with the joy of strong characterization. And it is a great way to welcome you back, my children, to the Longbox of the Damned. When there's no more room in hell, Deadpool will walk the earth, my children. Last year, I showed you Deadpool in a world of a zombie apocalypse. Now, behold what happened after those eventful days. Spoilers, my children! At the end of Night of the Living Deadpool, the Merc with a mouth allowed the zombie hordes to devour him, hoping to spread a cure for the zombie plague to all the infected. And it was a cure. Sort of. Instead, it created a world where zombies turned into Deadpools. But these are a bit tainted, as it were. For while the original Deadpool has himself a bit of an heroic streak, these Deadpools are still preoccupied with spreading themselves far and wide like the zombies. It's just they are much more intelligent than the zombies, so they're even more dangerous. While Deadpool is of course at the center of all of this, the actual protagonist of this tale is Liz, a teenage girl who is attempting to rescue her family from the Deadpools. They have been taking the few human survivors they can find for some purpose, and she has tracked them down, running into a single Deadpool along the road. This is the original Deadpool, but his memory is not what it should be, owing to the fact that he has a rather sizable hole in his mask at his forehead, which indicates that he put his own sword through his head. It has of course healed, but he is not sure why he did it. At least until they execute the rescue of Liz's family from a train. The Deadpools have a limited hive mind. Nothing that can travel over long distances, of course, but enough that, if Deadpool had not impaled his own brain, would have been enough to influence him. It is also on the train that they discover why the humans are being taken. They are converted into zombies, before then converted into Deadpools, horrifically altering everything they are into the chimichanga-loving mercenary. The original Deadpool will not stand for this. But soon he and Liz are captured and brought to a city, where during an escape attempt, they encounter a church of sorts of Deadpools. They all hear the voices in their heads, the factions of Kelly, Duggan, Posehn, Nicieza, Simone, the writers who tell them to do things. They need to spread the various gospels, probably so they can all have equal teams in football or something. The original Deadpool skewers them, and they once more make their escape, coming upon a group that says Deadpool's coming was foretold. They have a device left over from AIR, the organization responsible for creating the zombie plague, which they believe using it with Deadpool will finally end the plague of pools. And they are correct. Even knowing it will kill him, Deadpool voluntarily steps into the machine and gets infected with a new plague. This plague turns his regenerative powers upon himself, and he spreads it far and wide, leaving 99% of the Deadpools nothing but ashes. And so Liz, inspired by the original and his self-sacrifice, becomes herself the new Deadpool so that she can hunt down the ones that remain. There's only room in this world for one Deadpool after all. Return of the Living Deadpool, while not quite as dramatic as the first story, still brings on both the horror and the comedy, my children, that only Deadpool or Deadpools can. Die long und fester, my children! What? Did you think that Moarte would fail to acknowledge Star Trek's 50th anniversary? Oh, my children, that may have been a month ago, but we're still celebrating around here. The Enterprise comes across the USS Endeavor, adrift in space, having been declared lost for 22 years now. But like all good dead things around here, the Endeavor suddenly comes back to life and attacks the Enterprise. What's more, sensors indicate that the ship has no life signs aboard it. Ooh, there's something we haven't seen yet. Zombie starships! But such a fascinating idea must come to an end, as a retaliatory shot on them returns the dead ship to its former state. Beaming aboard the Endeavor, they discover corpses aboard, their flesh whittled away down to the very bone. And hey, Bones scans his namesake! Anyway, there is evidence of some kind of a fight on board the ship, and they're still surprised that someone was able to fly the ship despite them being dead for 20 years. One of the away teams suddenly gets possessed by something, truly showing what kind of a ghost ship this is, and he tries to attack the others. After knocking him unconscious, they beam back aboard their ship, along with the ethereal inhabitants of the Endeavor. While the Enterprise continues on her way, Kirk deals with a little romantic trouble, as one of his crew is actually a former lover of his. He had left under less than stellar circumstances, and she ended up marrying a man she did not love. Seems like a really bizarre way of getting back at the next boyfriend, but what the hell do I know? The only woman I know is the skeleton of a spider, which shouldn't even be possible. But it seems that ex-girlfriend Lieutenant Hester is linked up with what happened to the Endeavor. Reviewing the ship's log tapes, they saw that it was responding to a distress call from Lieutenant Hester's great-grandmother, also presumed dead, and yet was found by the Endeavor alive and aged. The crew began to manifest signs of dementia after taking her aboard, killing each other over the course of a week. The mystery deepens when they head to the planet where the old woman was found, including a corpse preserved in ice and a strange device that is a combination of Federation and alien technology. As more and more people fall to the madness, they begin to rave that what they want is Hester, and we soon learn what it was exactly that happened. The great-grandmother was conducting unsanctioned experiments with transporters. The rest of her team were human guinea pigs, volunteering themselves for the experiments, and they never rematerialized. Their consciousness lived on, eventually merging into a single being of pure energy, driven by a mad desire for revenge over their current ghostly state. They killed the crew of the Endeavor as they pursued Hester's great-grandmother off of the Endeavor. But she is dead now too, buried in the ice. They give her body to them, but Kirk decides this is probably not a good idea to leave such murderous beings around, overloading some phasers and blowing them to hell. And Hester leaves so she can get on with her life. Yet another woman out of Kirk's past leaving because the guy really has commitment issues. Star Trek number 9 reminds us all that even when it can be explained scientifically, there are some things stronger than death, and ghosts can still come back to haunt you. Dream a dream with me, my children! Back when the Longbox began, we took a look at an opening storyline of the Sandman, where he had to find a hope in hell. But now, let's see how he deals with a nightmare of his own creation, shall we? Our setting for this tale is one that should be familiar to many. A convention! But this is a very special convention. A cereal convention. And I know how much my children love cereal. Some people like fruit in their cereal, some people like milk. I personally like blood, but I'm old-fashioned. But this convention is actually a bit of a play on words. They don't mean cereal as in Captain Crunch. but rather Captain Crunch your bones after they've killed you. Yes, it is actually a convention for serial killers, murderers from across the land, all gathering together in this one hotel to discuss all sorts of things. How they're all just misunderstood, how to make money off your obsessive need to kill things. Even a panel about the religious part of it. One guy who thinks he's God, while the others deny that, because they clearly get told by God to kill people, and he doesn't look like that. Ah, but there is a snag or two in this year's convention. For starters, the guest of honor, the family man, has not shown up. Oh no! They will need another guest of honor. How fortunate, then, that one particular serial killer of infamy has arrived. The Corinthian! Except the Corinthian is no ordinary disturbed individual. He is a nightmare. Literally! He was a creation of the Sandman, who, when Morpheus was imprisoned for so long, escaped and went out on his own, causing murder and mayhem in his wake. Another problem is that they were supposed to have the hotel all to themselves, but two guests remain in the hotel. One is Rose Walker, whose brother is missing, and the police have asked her to stay put. The other is her friend Gilbert, who knows stories. Ah, but that's not the only thing he knows, for in an elevator ride with the Corinthian, he recognizes him. But while the Corinthian knows nothing of Gilbert's presence, there is something odd that he and another killer or two notice. A rather nervous sort who doesn't seem to belong, claiming to be a killer known as the Boogeyman. The problem is that the Boogeyman has been dead for 3 years, and they soon discover who he really is, a magazine writer and editor for a magazine. While he claims to be like the others, he is not one of them, so they take it upon themselves to deal with him. The panels continue as the convention goes on. Discussions on how it is human nature that they do what they do. They are predators and everyone else are prey. A panel on their psychology and how they're no different than their victims. And of course a panel on women serial killers and how they're all stereotyped as black widows or killer nurses. One killer, called Funland, can't help himself when he sees Rose Walker, deciding to play with her as he has other victims before. Fortunately, Gilbert left her a name she should contact if things get dicey. Morpheus, who appears and deals with the matter. Still, he instructs her to leave for her own safety, especially since he has other business here with the Corinthian. And as you might imagine, the Sandman, the Lord of all dreams, good and bad, is just rather disappointed in the Corinthian. He was to be his most horrific masterpiece, a dark reflection of everything humanity would not confront in itself. And instead, he's just spent 40 years eating eyeballs and showing humanity there are bad people in it. Kind of lame, really. The Corinthian tries to fight him. Not exactly a smart move for a living nightmare to try to confront the guy who is literally dreams and nightmares. But maybe he's just oxygen high from all the air he breathes in through his eye mouths. And Morpheus destroys him, promising to do a better job of making him next time. As for the other serial killers, Morpheus is tired of them all living their own comforting daydreams of being heroes, being in their right. So he bestows upon them a new nightmare. Self-awareness! They see themselves for what they truly are, how small and pathetic they really are. Not a happy ending for the misguided, the twisted, and the truly evil, but a happier ending for Rose. Gilbert has found her brother in the trunk of the Corinthian's car, alive but in need of a hospital. And while Rose was frightened by these events, none were quite as frightened as the serial killers, who retreated into the darkness again, confronting something in themselves they hoped they would never see again. It is time, my children! Time to show off the glory of the mummy! And who better to do this with their pantheon of monster characters than Marvel with the living mummy? While I usually avoid talking about the covers so that we can sink our teeth into the meat of things, I think it's important I talk about this, my children. Behold the living mummy! He lives, he walks, and bullets cannot stop him! He waited 3,000 years to wreak the revenge of the monster! Some people say monsters are too slow, too stumbling. I say the monsters have patience. It's why the monsters will win in the end. Ah, but monsters are also tales of tragedy, as you will see. Behold the first encounter with the living mummy, a pair of Israeli soldiers in the Gaza Strip discussing the futility of war and fighting and bitterness, before they behold a monster, a thing out of hell, the mummy. As the cover boasted, he is immune to bullets, bouncing off of its now hardened skin and only allowing dust to fly off of its form. They are saved only by the image of humanity in the eyes of its would-be victims, allowing him to set off again. But here is where we meet our non-mummy protagonists, Dr. Scarab and his two anthropologist friends, Ron and Janice. The anthropologists have been seeking out the history of a forgotten African tribe, while Dr. Scarab hunts for a missing pharaoh, and now believes that their quests are intertwined. Having unearthed and translated a papyrus scroll, he learns of a lost time in Egyptian history with the pharaoh Aram-Set, his high priest Nephris, and the African tribe, the Swahili's, who had been forcibly conscripted to build a massive monument to Aram-Set. The tribe was led by a giant of a man named Nkantu, who secretly organized a rebellion against their oppressors. Once the tomb was completed, Nkantu struck, killing Aram-Set. But Nephris had predicted this, using a magic potion to paralyze Nkantu and prepare a fight worse than death. He would be mummified alive, his blood replaced with embalming fluid. But through his potions, Nkantu would not die. He would live forever, immortal and immobile in the tomb. While the mummy was indeed sealed away, it seems the gods were not pleased by Nephris' actions, collapsing the tomb upon him and burying Nkantu until the present day. Dr. Scarab reveals he is a descendant of Nephris and believes that Nkantu could indeed still be alive in his tomb, thinking Nephris may have discovered the secret of immortality. The others are skeptical of such a claim, although they admit that even if Nkantu was still alive, being trapped for 3,000 years in a tomb, alive and conscious, well, he may have gone a wee bit mad. And they would be right! The escaped mummy walks the streets of Egypt, destroying cars and menacing people as he seeks out Dr. Scarab, his confused mind believing him to be Nephris, and eventually finding him, begging to be freed from his curse. Modern weapons finally start having more of an effect on the mummy, with tear gas slowing him, and actual tears flowing out of his long, dried eyes. Janice pities the creature, wanting them to try to help it, but she is too late, as Nkantu finds himself electrocuted when he pulls out power lines to try to kill those who attack him. The mummy is apparently dead, or is it? In either case, Dr. Scarab asks to study this creature, and the police hope the mummy will never live again. But of course they would live again, my children. But that is a tale for another day. For now, though, remember the power and the glory of the mummy, whether they be alive, dead, or undead. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men, my children? The shadow knows. In the Twilight Zone. Yes, my children, a crossover between an anthology series and a pulp hero. How can such a thing be accomplished? Well, the thing to remember is that the Twilight Zone had certain kinds of stories it enjoyed doing. Except in this case, it's putting the Shadow right into the middle of those types of stories. We begin with the Shadow and his compatriots, Margot Lane and Shrevey, attacking and disrupting an American Nazi gathering in New York. Margot is less than happy about the attack, though, because of the women and children in the crowds that the Shadow was happily firing bullets into. The Shadow believes that mercy and compassion are a weakness, something to be exploited by evil. But an explosion that rocks his vehicle soon changes things. The Shadow wakes up in his sanctum. Or rather, the Shadow's original identity before he was reborn, Kent Allard, awakens there. Indeed, he is confronted by himself, the Shadow, and neither knows what to make of this situation. Ghost, mask, or mirror, what are they to each other? Allard goes to talk to Margot, hoping to find some clarity or vision about these strange events. However, the conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Shiwan Khan, who gets into a fist fight with Allard. The two tumble over the balcony of Margot's apartment, and the Shadow finds himself waking up again with a very unfamiliar mask on. That of Preston Springs, aka Orson Welles. The Shadow is no fool, however, and while he admits the strange things happening to his co-star, he does so calmly and plays the part he is meant to play to others. Kent Allard tells her his story as the Shadow, how Kent Allard discovered what lurked in his own heart during World War I, and thought he could use his talents to benefit mankind instead of erode the empires of Europe. Later, after Kent stops the thief and hands him over to the police, a young child recognizes him as the voice of the Shadow and is curious why he didn't kill the thief like the Shadow would. But the Shadow explains. The thief was not a killer, not evil, just someone who should be punished in a court of law. And that gets Kent Allard wondering about his own fairness in dispensing justice, and he is thrown into his next stop in the Twilight Zone. Now he is in the body of Maxwell Grant, aka Walter B. Gibson, and is set to adapt the narrator of Detective Story Hour into a fully fledged character for his own magazine. His alter ego, the Shadow who came out from Kent Allard, encourages him to treat all of this as a falsehood, to use his talents to escape this illusion, only for him to get sucked down into a typewriter and confronted by justice herself when he makes this attempt. His entire experience is to teach him a lesson, a reminder that justice cannot be reckless. Justice requires mercy, and justice can find you anywhere. Maxwell Grant, meanwhile, awakens again at the typewriter to come up with some new ideas for this character, while the real Shadow finally awakens again inside the American Nazi camp. The Nazis intend to execute him and film said execution as a demonstration of their strength. They leave him alone with one Nazi guard, a young man whom the Shadow is able to hypnotize into helping him. However, given the boy's age, he is curious why he became a Nazi. He admits that he believes that Jewish people ruined his life, and the Nazis gave him honor and acceptance. Once they free Margot and Shrevey, the Shadow frees the boy from hypnosis and helps him see the light and the evils of the Nazis. And why did he do so? Because the experience has reminded him of his need for compassion and understanding, especially among people who may not have evil in their hearts. Unfortunately, those Nazis who do have such evil are only too happy to gun down the boy after he helps our heroes escape. But of course, the Shadow knows, and he knows how to dispense justice for that boy. But even with that boy's death, the Twilight Zone reminded him that when one chooses to do as the Shadow has done, become a masked man, he can unintentionally cover up more than his vice. He covers up his humanity.
Not horror, perhaps, but a reminder of the essential point about those who fight such horrors. To never let yourself become lost in it. To become a shadow of your former self. File under C for compassion in the Twilight Zone.
May the Force be with you, my children!
Now here is a franchise that we have not explored yet.
So let's take a look at a tale from the stars.
Star Wars Tales was an anthology series, but for our purposes, we are only interested in one story of this comic, Planet of the Dead. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, Han Solo and his kinda sorta werewolf buddy Chewbacca were lost in a sector of space on low on fuel. They soon detect a planet they can land on, although it's not listed on any charts.
Although considering they were lost and all, I don't see how they would know if it was on a map anyway.
The planet is more than a little unusual. There are no life form readings, or at least they're so faint as to be confusing. But there are clearly cities on this world, long abandoned buildings on skyscrapers. It's as if the entire population of the world left. Or they simply changed. Han and Chewbacca exit their ship to investigate and search for fuel, but soon hear the inhabitants of the planet, the one screaming, "Help us!" and the sound of something crashing. And out of the fog emerge corpses, decrepit, decaying beings that approach Han Solo and scream for him to help them. Han's able to blast some back as the zombies begin converging on him, crushing him as they demand that he stay with them, until Chewbacca emerges from the Falcon to assist in shoving off the zombies and retreating back to the ship. Unfortunately, it seems someone does not want them to leave. The fuel lines have been severed, meaning they no longer even have enough fuel to take off and drift in space. No, they're stuck on the planet with all the zombies. However, the undead soon disappear once day breaks, and they head out again to check things out. They meet with a woman and her baby, who tells them that they have to leave, that this planet is haunted. They were a small, thriving world, about to begin their expansion into outer space. However, their great interplanetary ship malfunctioned in orbit, and they crashed back onto their world, with 1,000 colonists rising from their graves, and beginning a reign of terror that killed off almost everyone else on the planet. Every night, on the hour of their death, they return to seek out the living. Solo realizes the sound they heard earlier must have been their ghostly demise, replayed over and over again. And perhaps the trick is to break the cycle. If the ship crashed in the fog, maybe if they laid down some landing lights, the ship can land safely, and the dead can be at peace. The ghost ship does indeed land safely, and those aboard have been guided home to rest, allowing the survivors their own chance at peace as well.
Sometimes, my children, the dead come back as force ghosts. But around here, we prefer our ghosts to be a bit less spiritual and a lot more haunting. Once upon a time, my children, there was a house that some wished to escape from, and others wished to claim. Let us learn now the story of the House of Mystery, shall we?
After the events of the last volume, Fig's father, Peter, is now trapped inside the house along with all the others. He tries to explain where the house came from, a space between substance and sense, between shape and form, word and thought. People lived in this space, built a city inside of it, and because they existed between such concepts, they could walk to many different worlds. There was a schism between the people in this world. The nobility, descended from the early travelers and explorers of the space between, and the poor masses without that talent. The nobles could be admitted into the Pathfinders, an elite group who traveled to various worlds and brought back with them riches and stories. But they unwittingly brought back ideas as well, ones that led to riot and revolution. Eventually, the nobility fled to many worlds, and the revolutionaries inherited the cities, learned their secrets, and for whatever reason, eventually fled the city, leaving only ghosts in their wake. It is more than possible that the house was a building left behind from this place. But there are more dealings afoot. Rena, a character who had been taken from the House of Mystery in Volume 1, makes a deal with the coachman and his associates. With her guidance, she will get them all inside the House of Mystery. They want Fig, and they will have her. And, well, someone else who has her is Harry the bartender, still here after 7 years. The two have grown rather close after the last volume, and they are now in love. But he has no memory of his life before the house, and Fig's father suspects the truth. The two get into a scuffle, but find themselves traveling sideways through worlds. Harry is not doing well now that he's separated from the house, and Peter finally explains why that is. Harry is not real. He's a manifestation of the house itself, which was already a living being. It's why Harry has no memories from before the house. It's because he didn't exist before the house. The two make their way across the landscape, barely avoiding being chopped down by various creatures that live in the lands, until they are rescued by not only their friends from the house, but various bar patrons. Indeed, it seems they did not slide between worlds, just temporarily placed themselves in the wastelands surrounding the house. Mind you, it was still a surprising thing to do, considering normally one cannot leave the grounds of the House of Mystery. But then again, the unwanted normally cannot enter either. Rena returns after telling the beings who have recruited her the conception of her history as a werewolf and the various aspects of her life. Terrifying and terroristic that they were. And now she only wishes to return home, which is promised to her as she opens up a box and destroys the barriers that keep one-dimensional plane from another, and allowing the conception and its armies to flood inside to try to take Fig. Fortunately, one of the bar patrons also happened to secretly be a dragon, who holds off a robot army as Fig uses some kind of power to teleport everyone and the house away. Rena kills herself out of guilt for everything that has happened. Not that that matters to the coachman, irritated once again that he has lost the House of Mystery. For the coachman removes his mask and reveals his identity. Kane, the true owner of the house! And he wants his house back.
Houses are always alive, my children. They are scarred by everything we do inside of them. Some of those scars are good ones, believe it or not. And I think that sometimes that houses just want someone to talk to. A creepy hello to you, my children! It's another year, which means another in the finest in illustrated horror. It's time for more creepy.
We start things off with Brooklyn 1950, where a hospitalized old man named Vernon tells a story about his youth to his nurse. Vernon and his brother Dwight had bad dreams of a voice calling for them. And soon they see an unusual car driving around the area. They follow the car once and see a man being pulled over to the car, where the driver of the vehicle unleashes some tendrils that reach out at the man, draining him dry. Dwight wants to go closer, but Vernon pinches him and pulls him back out of it. That night, they have the dreams again, and Dwight is drawn once more to the car. The occupant instructs him to take Vernon to him, but Vernon manages to escape that fate. Or does he? Well, ask the nurse, and she'll tell you a different story. After a tale about mother and father creepies foreplay, we get to our second tale, Ada. The story of Ada is in fact a take on Benjamin Button. We meet the young Alan Coburn as he encounters a woman at his father's institute where he's studying medicine. She appears old at first, but when he sees her again 5 years later, she appears younger. When he takes her out on a night on the town, she is frightened by the appearance of a baby, and they return to the institute. According to Alan's father, the former head of the institute had experimented on his ailing wife with a regenerative formula. It did heal her, but their daughter was born looking old and decrepit. Her mind developed normally though, so she has been aging backwards in appearance ever since. She was frightened by the baby because, having seen herself in the mirror at a young age, she was so confused by how a child would look normally. Which seems a really silly reaction as she's gotten older, but whatever. She grows old, or young, and dies. Nothing really more to say.
Why the hell was that even in this comic?
Fortunately, there is a return to form in the final story, Drown Town. Welcome to the picturesque town of Enfield, Massachusetts. Historically, Enfield was one of 4 towns that had to be flooded for the creation of the Quabbin Reservoir. But it seems in this version of events, there's still a town on the water, where a young girl named Sophie drowns. Her parents were of course distraught, especially her poor mother, who prayed for a miracle to bring her daughter back to life. But the wrong god answered her prayer. Sophie was alive again, but changed. Not in behavior, but in her needs. After collapsing once, her father quickly rushes her outside to a local lake and soaks her feet in the water, rejuvenating her. The mother wants to take her to the hospital, but the father refuses, saying not to challenge the miracle. One night, she decides to sneak her to the hospital. But Sophie's father reveals that she's not her daughter. She's the daughter of all the monster people, and they decide it's dinner time.
Next time you decide to go for a little swim, my children, try to make sure you avoid that area when you're dangling your feet in, eh? Headless hello to you, my children! When we last left off, Reiko, Necromancer and supernatural investigator last year, she had gotten her head cut off by a serial killer. Not sure how you continue the story after something like that, but let's find out, shall we?
We resume things in the middle of a battle between other necromancers, specifically Rudo and Ryoka in combat with a Droog and his undead servant. Unlike Reiko, these summoners are much more specialized in their resurrections, only able to summon one specific zombie at a time to act as their agent.
It's like Pokemon, but with corpses.
The Droog they kill states that Rudo and Ryoka are opposing the Master, some person who is amassing an army of summoners to do their bidding. The only one who has any chance of stopping them is Reiko, who unfortunately is only just a head floating in a pool of formaldehyde. Another servant of the Master is dispatched to cremate Reiko's remains, fearing that she had zombified herself. But fortunately, Rudo and Ryoka arrive to stop her. At least until Ryoka gets her head cut off too. But what a coinkydink! Reiko's head ends up on the now headless body of Ryoka, so she's got herself a new body to use. And one she quite happily uses to deal with the summoner sent to cremate her. She has come back because she sensed a truly evil force out there. This Master whom she already has identified. Her twin sister Riruka. Riruka plans to take over the world with an army of the dead, and only Reiko and a small band of other summoners can stop her. You've already met Rudo, but also there is Yuki and his little wheelchair-bound sister Mayo. Mayo is not so useful in a fight, but Yuki's tenacity makes up for it, as well as his irritation that Reiko is using Ryoka's body. Still, Reiko has preserved Ryoka's severed head in ice, hoping to reattach it and reanimate her once their mission is complete. She's not a jerk after all. At least not to anyone but her high school acquaintances from the first volume, whom she has to discard in fear of Riruka using them to get to her, even letting one be killed. She plays the cold act, but clearly it does affect her. The journey to Riruka's base of operations, acquired via twin telepathic link between Reiko and Riruka, is long and difficult, encountering other summoners at Riruka's beck and call. But also they gain a new ally, Jasmine, the beautiful mercenary that Reiko manages to get to work for her side. And they will need the ally, for when they arrive at the base, Riruka's right-hand summoner, Dr. Zero, convinces Yuki to kill Rudo for the promise of restoring Mayo's legs. He, of course, has no intention of fulfilling that bargain and gets Yuki killed, although not without having to bear a cross himself. 15 minutes into their great battle against Riruka's forces, and half of her team is dead. Not an auspicious start to this glorious battle. That probably happens in Volume 3.
Reiko the Zombie Shop! The story that reminds us that whether you're an investigator or a world conqueror, corpses are really just meat puppets. We have such sights to show you, my children. Clive Barker returns to assist in the writing of this story from Boom Studios, and many such delights that it brings with it.
Pinhead, leader of the Cenobites and Hell Priest of Infamy, known for inducing pleasures and suffering of the flesh, occasional orchestrator of hellish punishment, even once or twice seeking to bring hell onto Earth, is bored. Not surprising, really. The Cenobites are beings that have pushed the boundaries of sexual gratification so far that they are now unable to tell the difference between pain and pleasure. So it's not so bizarre that there really is nowhere else to go with the idea. So Pinhead is now disillusioned by his mission, apathetic about the victims who deliberately or unintentionally open the lament configuration and summon him. And so he takes it upon himself to have a change in vocation. He will relinquish his hellish status, become human, risk a shot at either redemption or new damnation without power or titles in hell. Ah, but there are rituals to follow. Pinhead fulfills a role in hell, an important one.
Let's face it, I think we can all agree that bureaucracy is really a thing from hell too.
And as such, Pinhead must find a replacement for his position. And so he sets his plan in motion, and it involves his old, well, nemesis, I suppose you could call her, Kirsty Cotton. Ah, but Kirsty has not been idle during the last 25 years. Even if you ignore the events of the 6th Hellraiser movie, Hellseeker, Kirsty is not exactly an innocent soul. In the intervening time, she has assembled a group of harrowers, as it were, who seek to destroy any object like the lament configuration, ones that summon demons. Her group is made up of those who have been touched by such objects. Marcus Ames, a priest who has left a snow globe, and the demon it summoned informed him that hell is not flames, but frost, and this chilly vision of hell froze his heart. Then there was Bethany Howard, a call girl who admired objects owned by a rich man who had hired her, including a broken music box, and upon activating it, summons forth a half-demon, half-machine creature, a monster of gears and claw, that kills her unborn child. And finally, Alexander Price, who as a young boy, he and his brother were given the lament configuration by a familiar homeless man. The Cenobite known as the Female took his brother, David, into the box and offered him a job. He would be a facilitator, getting these artifacts like the box into people's hands. Every time the lament configuration found its way to him, he would be allowed to see his brother, and each time his brother begged him to stop. It is only when he almost gives the box to another pair of children that he finally breaks his contract, allowing his brother death and never having to see the objects again, except to hunt them down and destroy them. And then, of course, there is Kirsty herself. She is drawn back into the proceedings with traps and messages left by Pinhead, even resulting in the death of her boyfriend, a writer and lecturer talking about the nature of stories. Pinhead believes that as far as Kirsty is concerned, she has never left Hell, making a new one for herself with her quest, and that their dance will soon come to an end. He offers her only these parting words: there is salvation for her yet, and perhaps for him too. Also, her friends have been kidnapped by the Cenobite's current facilitator, and she is threatened with their deaths if she doesn't bring the box. But that's for another time.
Oh, no tears for us not concluding the story now, my children. It's a waste of good suffering. We shall return to it someday, though, for this is indeed for your eyes. Titans together, my children!
But children are really why we're all here, aren't we? We want to see children
Ascend to greater things!
Well, some of us would rather see them descend into hell as well.
Meet Goth, an unoriginal name for a rather original supervillain. He is a movie horror star, so he's already pretty awesome in my book. Although in his book, he has something else that makes him interesting. Instead of giving out his own autographs to people, he has people sign his autograph book. But no time for that now. The Titans have set up their new email system. This was 1998 after all, it was still a pretty new idea. And they are getting flooded by emails from teenagers in need of assistance. And my children do indeed need help, as a young boy and fan of Goth takes a gun into his school and, well, tragedy occurs. Back with the Titans, since they are a new team, they're having some team-building exercises. The women are going for a ladies' night out, while the boys sit around watching horror movies.
Hot women at the bar or horror movies? Well, I know who's having the real fun time. Pop in the type!
The horror movie features Goth as he murders various people, but as Cyborg continues to examine the emails they've been getting from teens, they realize that a lot of murders and teen violence emulate the horror movies of Goth. What's worse, when they plug in the locations that Goth has gone on tour on a map, the lines form a pentagram. Speaking of this glorious individual, he happens to be at the same bar as the ladies, even getting Starfire to sign his autograph book. And a picture taken with him does not feature our leading man.
Which does make me wonder how the hell they recorded him for their movies, but whatever.
Goth tries to make Donna Troy his next victim, but one touch to Miss Troy gets him all purple and bothered.
Damn, she got main character shields.
But now we know who's the survivor of this slasher.
They follow Goth to a horror convention to investigate further, as he encourages his fans to sign the book. He's a very convincing speaker, talking about the terrible things in this world, how teenagers must reject this world that has been destroyed by their elders, how their dreams have had to be abandoned, and how the terrors of real life are worse than any horror movie that they blame society's ills upon. And Goth has them repeat his motto, the Latin phrase, non fui fui, non sum, non curo, or, I was not, I was, I am not, I care not. And with the chant in full force, all of the children who have signed Goth's book, including Starfire, find themselves transported to the hell city of Dis. Starfire thinks he has condemned these children to hell, but Goth genuinely does not believe that. He believes that he has saved them, given them apathy, disinterest, and immortality so that they won't ever have to worry about the terrible things about teenage life. The area bathes people in lethargy, something that affects even the Titans when they write their names in the book to follow Goth into hell. The children do seem to prefer it here, prefer not caring about anything, especially with the terrible things in their lives, but Starfire manages to figure out how to get them freed. Give them something to care about, whether it's sympathy, their own loved ones, or indeed for Goth, whom Starfire threatens with death, causing all the children to be worried about him. Goth himself is transported to Earth, where he admits how much he cares for the children too.
Yes, for even in hell there are those who care.
After all, while hell is a place of punishment, it is
also a place of reflection and redemption. I bid you welcome, my children. Let's see how Dynamite Entertainment adopts the original Dracula novel, and how well it keeps things spooky, shall we?
If you're unfamiliar with the story, allow me to introduce you to Jonathan Harker on his way to a property deal in a foreign country. And he is warned by many that this is Walpurgis Nacht and he should not attempt to get to the castle. And after encounters with wolves and snow and, well, dead things, he does eventually survive and find himself at the castle of Count Dracula, arranging to sell a property in London for the Count. The Count insists that he stay longer and longer, a virtual prisoner inside the castle, with strange sights and sounds around him. Back in England, Jonathan's fiancée, Mina, corresponds with her friend Lucy and her 3 suitors, a doctor, an American, and a lord. She marries the lord, Arthur, but on the subject of brides, Dracula has 3, and he has promised Jonathan to them after he concludes his business. Jonathan narrowly manages to escape the castle with his life, what little there is left of it. After arriving in England to claim his new home in Carfax, we read diaries and letters from Mina and Lucy concerning a strange illness that seems to overtake Lucy. She is bloodless, yet not anemic. It is, of course, hard after so many years to separate our knowledge of vampires these days with this tale. But allow yourselves to be lost in the moment, my children. Strange things are afoot. In the lunatic asylum run by our former suitor doctor, there is a man named Renfield who collects spiders and flies and seems to know about our dear Dracula. And while Mina goes off to reunite and marry the escaped Jonathan, Lucy's condition calls for a specialist in rare diseases, Dr. Van Helsing. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, giving blood transfusions and laying garlic around her window each night, she is dead a short time later. Upon Jonathan and Mina's return to the area, they meet with Dr. Van Helsing and share Jonathan's journal of the events at Dracula's castle. He believes in the account, but darker things are afoot, as newspapers tell of children attacked or missing, with similar bite wounds as Lucy. And soon the good doctor and the 3 suitors find themselves in the tomb of Lucy. They discover her feeding upon a child. She is indeed a vampire, and they must go about the grisly task of ending her, cutting off her head and filling her mouth with garlic, and driving a stake through her body. From there, the group, now including Jonathan and Mina, set out to destroy Count Dracula, tracking down the boxes full of earth from his native home that allow him to travel freely and widely. While successful, Dracula takes his revenge by attacking poor Mina, getting her to drink his blood so that she too will succumb to vampirism. They chase him back to his native soil, the group eventually separating so that Van Helsing and Mina can deal with Dracula's wives, while the rest of the group arrive back at Castle Dracula just in time to stake his heart and destroy the foul beast, although one of their number perishes in the attempt. And 7 years later, most of the records of this strange encounter have been lost. So how fortunate is it that they have all been collected for this comic, eh?
The complete Dracula is one of the best adaptations of the original story, embellishing little and focusing on the mood, the atmosphere, and horror of our beloved Dracula. Going my way, my children? Be careful about who you might pick up that's hitchhiking. Of course, hitchhikers beware of whose car you step into.
Curtis Jones is a traveling salesman who accidentally runs over a man one lonely night. The man is okay, just asking to be taken to a hospital and leaving behind his bright red truck, although not without first requesting a bag be taken out of that truck. It seems that this man who was run over was already on the way to the hospital, for you see, he hasn't slept in 9 days. The next morning, his wife has reported him missing, and the cop, Detective Granger, swears to do everything he can to find him, although he admits the very likely possibility that his type, traveling salesman, always on the road, he may have been having some affairs on the side, although of course she denies it. However, Hurdis has a different problem, since he awakens the next day with a headache, the hitchhiker gone, but his bag remaining. After learning that the hitchhiker was found dead, he tries to call the police about it, but when they mention what day it is, he suddenly puts on some sunglasses and hangs up. Stopping for some gas, he takes them off again as the station attendant invites him to go have a party, as it were. He accepts, though wants to get a little bit of sleep so he's refreshed in the morning. He is awoken by another police officer, whom he fights off when he fails to recognize that fact. But Hurdis is in even more trouble, since the reason the cop woke him up was because the gas station attendant is dead, and a familiar red truck is driving away. He sees it again after calling into a police station to admit he assaulted the cop, but the incompetent deputy makes him hang up, not helped by finding another dead body and the truck driving away once more. Meanwhile, Detective Granger is brought in to the FBI to investigate Hurdis. His traveling does correspond to a number of unsolved murders, and they need Granger to investigate what could have made such a dedicated family man snap, assuming he is the killer. What are his favorite shows? Does his wife nag him? Is he a compulsive masturbator? You know, the important things! Speaking of, his next victim is a stripper named Bambi, who is happy to let his hands go wandering south when he flashes a $100 bill her way. However, he doesn't kill her right away. They go on a bit of a shopping spree over the next few days, where we learn he has some sores in his mouth, an inherited condition, and that he does not have dreams. Granger finishes up his investigations of Hurdis, and his conclusion is about how there was no impetus for this sudden aggression. Oh, not that there was a lack of reason, but that nothingness is the reason. He is a boring man in a boring job, saying boring things all day long, and spends lots of his time alone. He is empty inside, devoid of anything human anymore. He fears making no impact on this universe. He snapped. However, well, the FBI doesn't buy it. They think Granger is protecting his own issues with his divorce and life problems onto Hurdis. Although they are not too far off, especially as one of the conversations he had with Bambi, before he killed her of course, was about how small someone on Earth must look to God. And so with his latest victim, Hurdis decides to go home, and encounters the red truck once more, seeing the hitchhiker at the wheel again. He drives him off the road, or rather, he drives some woman and her child off the road as he races home. But, funny story, the FBI identified the first victim, Hurdis Jones. Yeah, funny story, my children. It seems that the person Hurdis picked up was a man suffering from a delusional condition that left him with those mouth sores. He was on his way to the hospital for medication to treat it, and never arrived. He murdered Jones, took his identity, and now arrives back home to a family that does not know who the hell he is. Fortunately, Detective Granger is there to stop him. But as a radio report soon states, it seems Detective Granger never made it out of that house, nor did Hurdis Jones's family. So who is this detective who is stopping a bunch of kids driving along the road, Why, it's Detective Granger, of course.
Friendly tip to my children out there who will eventually be behind the wheel. Be careful as you're driving, for whom you stop for, and who stops you. There are no strings on me, my children! Last year, we saw the beginning of the latest incarnation of the murderous puppets created by Andre Toulon. And there is still more to tell of their story.
The puppets? are not exactly happy to be puppets. After all, would you be happy being a foot tall and constantly under the sway of any murderous psychic who comes along? They even retain their memories of being human, which can't help the feeling of being trapped in this form. And so they find themselves in the company of a sorceress who also specializes in such dolls like the puppets, and with the concept of soul transportation. Blade was sent to scout her out first, but what Blade does not tell the other puppets is that this woman, Madame Adon, lets a man use a vampiric puppet to murder his girlfriend and the man she was cheating on him with. He is that desperate to be human again, to be able to feel again. But Madame Adon is good to her word, letting the puppets find some victims to be their new bodies. One last act of murder before they can start fresh in new bodies. Her only payment is the puppets themselves, which they are happy to give away, save for Jester, who wants his as a keepsake. However, shortly afterwards, we see that the puppets are moving around once again, and for some, their new bodies are not exactly doing that well for them when they find out who it is they took possession of. The puppets come back and murder each of the resurrected souls one by one, save for Torch, who we learn is actually the son of Andre Toulon, partly estranged as he had joined the Nazi youth at one time in his life. But that more sadistic streak allowed him to get the jump on Torch. As for the rest of our former puppets, well, as each of them dies, they appear together in hell, and we learn that Madame Adon is actually a servant of a demon. You see, in Puppet Master 4 and 5, we learned that Andre had gotten his masterful puppet making and soul transference knowledge through a demon named Sutek. They defeated Sutek, but what this comic reveals is that Toulon went back to look in on Sutek's body to confirm he was dead, only to discover Sutek's son, Anapa, having gained his power. Madame Adon works for Anapa, who wants to use the puppets for his own nefarious purposes, although he claims to just want their souls. Torch attacks her and then kills himself to appear in hell, having dreams about this encounter with Anapa. He strikes a deal with the demon, return them to their puppet bodies, perform 7 nightmarish tasks for Anapa, but once the deal is up, their souls will be free to go. Obviously, a bargain with a demon is never so simple a task, especially since the puppets did not know of Anapa's connection to Madame Adon, but it matters not. For the moment, these people were once more puppets, in more ways than one.
Puppet Master reminds us all
That sometimes we make a choice of our own free will,
but that does not mean there were no strings attached. Haunted hello to you, my children! We have seen Doug Mensch present a world where Batman becomes a vampire. But how about another Elseworld story, where he became Batman later in adulthood, to fight all other creatures of the night?
Welcome to Haunted Gotham, my children. It is a world where the citizens of this dark city dare not step over the city limits, assuming they can even think to do so. Werewolves and talking skeletons and sorcerers pollute this land, with no protection and no outsiders to come and spoil the supernatural fun. But there is Dr. Thomas Wayne, his wife Martha, and their adult son Bruce, whom they have been training for years for some unseen purpose. After a demonstration of resurrecting the dead by Dr. Emil Warner, Bruce's parents are attacked and killed by a werewolf, sparking Bruce to finally embrace his destiny. His father was part of a cabal looking to undo the haunting of Gotham, the Secret Six, and they planned to make Bruce their agent against the forces of evil. The Batman! The Batman would fight fire with fire, be a dark hero of the night to oppose the villainous ways of Emil Warner and other demonic presences. Warner himself had plans for the corpse of Thomas Wayne, though, attaching his head to a patchwork Joker creature. and migrating his soul into it for eternal life. Warner begins his work for a group of dark demonic lords who cause most of the harm in Gotham, resurrecting zombies to kill any living people they find. The Batman, in the meantime, joins forces with Commissioner Gordon, another ally of the Secret Six, who was informed about this plan to inspire hope in Gotham City. And he has already set that plan in motion, first by having a trusted officer, Cassandra Knight, attempting to infiltrate a cabal of werewolves, and secondly, by releasing press statements supporting the Batman, letting the people know of this figure who will bring light to the dark city. And indeed, Batman does well to live up to the lofty reputation built by the Commissioner, rescuing people from the zombies, destroying the werewolf cabal, including executing the werewolf who killed his parents, and swearing to the demons of haunted Gotham that while they may yet feast upon Gotham, they will choke upon it. Batman is aided still by a fortune teller named Cat Magic, who locates Warner for him. His son confronts the Dark Lords themselves, although with them, he simply convinces them to take a step back in the fight against Warner by spraying some holy water out at them. After the bad joke that is Warner is decapitated and the head of Bruce's father returned to its body, Bruce must deal with an invasion of a different sort. Space snakes! Well, it is said that they came from space, but their power is still demonic in origin, almost Lovecraftian, as this Ophidian cult seeks to appease their giant snake god with human sacrifice. And one cannot doubt that the Batman's star is never higher for the hopeful of Gotham, as he manages to bring down that giant serpent from the inside out. But there is still the matter of the Dark Lords to deal with, and the trap they set for him. While Bruce has had frequent contact with the ghost of Thomas Wayne, the soul of his mother has long since been missing. With the help of all of his allies, Bruce attempts a seance to locate the soul of his mother, and he steps into a trap of the Dark Lord's devising, allowing not only the corrupted soul of Martha Wayne back into this world, but all of the Dark Lord's servants of other ghostly or demonic nature. However, thanks to the brave and grave assistance of the Batman's allies, eventually they are driven back and the corrupt soul is restored to its purity, sent off with Thomas Wayne to the afterlife. The Dark Lords are defeated once again, but haunted Gotham still has many days and many enemies left to be dealt with. And perhaps that will be a tale for another day.
Haunted Gotham, like the Batman Vampire trilogy, shows us that it is the human part of the Batman that makes it so important. Though as far as I'm concerned, it's the Bat and the Werewolf and the other such monsters that are the most entertaining. When there's no more room in hell, my children, well, I'd come up here even if that wasn't the case. George Romero, creator of several good and several not so good zombie movies, did have a hand in making a comic book sometime. Let's take a look, shall we?
Toe Tags was intended to be an anthology series by DC where various horror creators could have a run where they got to get their horror on, but only this first miniseries was ever made. The storyline is called The Death of Death, and while that was also the silly name of a documentary in Romero's Diary of the Dead, here it has a little more meaning behind it. Meet Damian Cross. Only a few months ago, he was a college student along with his girlfriend Judy, spending his spare time assisting the scientist Dr. Hoffman at the local zoo. But then the zombie outbreak happened. The end of the world followed soon afterwards, with the survivors and not survivors forming into their own little kingdoms they assembled for themselves in the hopes of creating a new, better world despite the zombies. But Damian's situation is unique. After he made sure Judy was well, relatively safe, he returned to the zoo in the hopes of finding Dr. Hoffman, who was no doubt working on a cure for the zombie plague. Damien freed the animals from the zoo so that they might stand a better chance against the zombies, including his elephant friend, Mr. Tembo. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of Damien and Mr. Tembo, he is still ripped apart by the zombies and bitten in several places. Fortunately, Dr. Hoffman had a way to save his life. Or rather, save his death. For poor Damien was already dead, but with Hoffman's special serum that prevents the decay of corpses, Damien retained his mind and intellect. He has no need to eat flesh to survive, and Hoffman even managed to equip him with an arrow cannon to replace his missing hand. Damien is still less than enthusiastic about his new life for himself, especially in regards to Judy, but she is fine with it. However, Hoffman's serum is not unknown to some of the other factions, particularly the remnants of Entron. Get it? This was 2005. A company that has pretty much assumed the role of the US government since, well, the government no longer exists. They mortally wound Hoffman while in the process of trying to retrieve him, but now work to acquire Damien, since he either should know where more of the serum is, or at least his body will contain the serum, which they believe will act as a vaccine against the zombies. And poor Damien simply wants to know what his purpose is in this world, particularly since Hoffman believes that preserving the human race will depend upon this serum. But there's an odd and not particularly scientific principle that Hoffman proposes, that good and evil are literally built into our DNA, and that unlocking the good in people is what will allow more people to be saved by the serum. Eventually, they, and some other human survivors, come across a faction opposing Entron, one populated entirely by zombies, including their leader, who seems to also be a smart zombie. However, they clearly have a traitor in their midst, and it's soon clear that it is in fact their own leader. He wants a place in Entron's future, and has been deliberately misleading the zombie faction to whittle them down inch by inch. And it seems he is not quite as dead as he made himself out to be. But fortunately, Damien, Mr. Tembo, and Judy correct that for him. But the good news is that with the serum in hand and knowledge of how to keep the existing zombie hordes on a flesh-free diet, things will be looking brighter for Damien, despite the fact that he has a few more holes in him than he had before.
Sometimes it really does not matter if you are good, bad, alive, or dead. But it certainly does help if you've got an elephant on your side. Break out the popcorn, my children! It's movie night! And in particular, it's movie night for Stephanie Brown and Cara Zor-El in this fun little romp from Steph's Run in a bat cowl. And on this lonely little Friday night, Supergirl, being one of the cape and costume crowd, comes to a person's rescue. Namely Stephanie's, as she is saved from a boring evening at home with her mother playing Scrabble. Me personally, I like Scrabble. You can form such lovely words like blood and gore and triskaidekaphobia. But for them, they wish to have fun as two blondes out on the town. Cara Zor-El is quite into the idea of a normal college life that Stephanie has, even wanting to experience all the great things that college life has to offer. Keg parties, pillow fights. Why, yes, she has been watching a lot of college movies. Why do you ask? But on that subject, they decide to see an old movie that has been converted to 3D at the campus theater. Vampire's Bride Revival. But there are other things going on this night, like a student who runs past the two to the campus's super collider lab. His experiment and research are being shut down because he hasn't produced any results, and naturally he decides to produce those results now. He engages the experiment, and it goes out of control, affecting even the campus theater. The on-screen Dracula is alone, so alone. It is so dramatic and so typical of the terrors of being a vampire.
Not that the crowd seems to understand that. Philistines! Oh well, at least the 3D is good. Why, it's so good that Dracula is leaping off the screen. Or rather, Draculas are leaping off. The multiple Draculas begin attacking the movie audience, so of course it's time for superheroing as Kara rips off her blouse. Unfortunately, Stephanie Brown cannot rip open her shirt like that unless she just wants to show off her bra. She assures Supergirl that said bra does not have a bat on it.
It is purple though, you gotta stay consistent with these things.
Well, the Draculas are but copies of the movie version. They are still vampires, so their supernatural strength allows them to whack Supergirl. But Batgirl is able to goop one up and take him for examination by the guy responsible for all of this. They are completely empty. Not just emotionally alone, of course, but are actually hard light holograms converted from the projected images on the screen. The blast from the experiment only lasted a second, but films are 24 frames per second, so that's 24 Draculas running amok. He is also able to provide them with rods that can be used to destabilize the hard light. So just stick the metal rod in their hearts. One by one, they hunt down the Draculas, staking them together, and even stopping for ice cream. I mean, let's not ruin a girl's night out or anything. And eventually come to the final Dracula, who is able to put up a bit more of a fight. But in the end, superheroes exist to take out monsters, so they both stake him and conclude their evening on a much happier note. Although personally, I think they should have let him live for the sequel, Vampire's Bride Rises Again.
Well, this Dracula will forever be alone. Remember that none of you are ever alone, because I'm always here with you. Spirited salutations, my children. A lot of what we look at around here does still come back to the big two companies of Marvel and DC. So why don't we celebrate something from a real independent scene?
Spirits of St. Louis comes to us from a group of St. Louis creators who went to an Applebee's and put together a horror anthology spotlighting independent creators. No, seriously, the comic even says how that came about. And so we have here 13 stories of varying quality, with adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe stories like The Raven or The Cask of Amontillado, and more original works. Because of course we only have so much time here to talk, let's spotlight a few and you can see for yourself what sort of things can come out of a little wine and dine. I can only hope they drank blood on the occasion for maximum effect. Although some stories are not as bloody, but still very painful. For instance, there is the story of The Portrait, about a family that moves into a new house now that they've outgrown their little hovel. The father, Samuel, has inherited the place from his deceased Uncle Philip, who for years lived in the place all alone, aside for the painting of a beautiful woman hanging up on the wall. While they're moving in, Samuel notices that the painting seems to make eyes at him, as it were, much to his astonishment. As time passes, he spends all day just staring at the portrait, forgoing anything else relating to his family, until finally his wife declares that he seems to love the painting more than her. And he admits, indeed, that he does. And when she insults the painting, he strikes her, and she rightwise takes their son and leaves. He does not seem to care, though. After all, that just means he can be alone with her now. But, of course, I don't think the portrait is much interested in what sort of a man he really is, though. And she is off on a date of her own. Something a bit closer to home is the story of The Tentacle Monster in My Comic Box, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Clean My Room. I can assure you, my children, that I do not keep tentacle monsters in the Longbox of the damned, but far worse horrors inhabit it. Not an exaggeration, even. See, our young protagonist here is ordered by his mother to clean his room, But he says he is unable to because of said monster, who begins stealing all of his toys and games and making a quick mess of the place. When the boy objects though, the monster says he just wants a friend to play with. And now the two become buddies, playing with toys, reading comics, at least until Mother once more screams at the both of them to clean up the mess. And now they're both grounded. Let us close things out with a little haunted house story. Lamp Deck, the story of the Lamp Mansion. St. Louis, according to the story, is known as one of the most haunted cities in America. It could be because of the thousands of lost souls from the Civil War. It could be that the city was built on sacred memorial mounds of Native Americans. Or perhaps it's because the city is built on limestone, believed by some ancient cultures to hold on to energy for a long time before it is all released forcefully at once. And since energy is never created nor destroyed, and people are made of energy, well, you get the idea. As for the Lamp Mansion itself, it is full of history, full of dead family members, rejected family members, locked in the attic and unable to play with the children on the streets, of suicides and other tragic occurrences that might affect any who decide to buy the place up cheap and renovate it. Not just the man we follow around in this story, but whoever may come later to do the same deeds. After all, how many warning signs do you need to not buy a haunted mansion?
Spirits of St. Louis remind us all
That horror is not based in only one locale, and monsters are not native to one region.
enjoy peeking around the corners
Of your own hometown, eh?
It's harvest time, my children!
A dark harvest at that.
Someone is harvesting the souls of murderers
Who did not pay for their crimes.
a little bit of otherworldly vigilante justice. And you know how the cape and costume crowd feel about vigilantes.
To truly appreciate the kind of dark vigilantism on display, and why we appreciate it here, let us see this opening kill. 3 friends out on a fishing trip and taking a picture together. Except something in the picture catches their eye. The word harvest. They know what this means, and one man tearfully confesses that while as a frat boy, he accidentally pushed a girl off a roof, intending to get her into the swimming pool, and instead killed her. He never faced justice for that, and now all he asks is that the others tell his wife how much he loved her. Because harvest has come for him. In the middle of nowhere central Kansas, Oracle Huntress Black Canary and former Blackhawk Zinda are discussing the eyewitness accounts of harvest, of reports of 9 ritual murders, all victims prematurely aged, and at least 5 of whom were guilty of crimes they had never been arrested for. After a barroom brawl with the locals goes nowhere, Black Canary and Huntress ran off into the cornfields to flee the police, while Zinda has some more luck with a local nerd. Harvest, he says, is the spirit of revenge. She chooses people who killed someone and got away with it, marks them, letters of red, better off dead, and sucks the life right out of them. But the thing is that she doesn't choose entirely. Someone has to call for harvest, specifically to go after someone. And if Harvest does not like what she sees, she writes her name in blood so the victim can see it. The victim needs to see what is coming. And speaking of which, our other 2 heroines run into Harvest in the middle of the wilted cornfield. She can sense blood on both of their hands, but needs someone to call for her to take them out. But unfortunately for the heroines, someone has just done that. She chooses to go after Black Canary first, but of course, they are much more skilled than the average hick. Not that it helps them, since once she has a grasp on Black Canary, she quickly ages 50 years in a moment. Fortunately, Zinda arrives with a twin pair of guns to drive off Harvest, and the effect on Black Canary is temporary. but it's pretty clear that Harvest is indeed the real deal. But there is still more to Harvest, as the geeky boy was so kind to inform Zinda. It's not just that she steals the life energy from people, but that life energy can be transferred, make the difference between life and death, especially for terminally ill children. And what a coincidence that the sheriff has a baby who is very, very ill. But when they go to confront said sheriff, we learn more of Harvest's own backstory. How 6 decades before, a crazy drifter needed a way to keep a young girl from escaping him. So he drove railroad spikes into her shoulders. And while that young girl never escaped, Harvest did. While they're able to finally defeat Harvest, who flees, we learn it was the deputy sheriff who called on Harvest. Huntress decides not to arrest them over this incident, but that this will stop. One cannot condone trading a life for another like that, although Harvest would disagree about that point.
If you have someone who needs some help and someone who needs punishment, maybe something can be arranged. Maybe something can be harvested. Up and away, my children! We've already seen what it would be like if Batman was Frankenstein's monster. But what about the Man of Steel,
In 1888, Jim Gordon and Perry White are meeting in a social club to tell tales to each other and have themselves a jolly good time. But Perry White has a most fascinating yarn this time. It is the story of Victor Luthor in Ingolstadt, Switzerland. Luthor was a man of science, dedicated to discovering the secrets of life and the universe, the fundamental elements that make up everything we know and enjoy. But the heads of the university are not happy with him. While he sees himself as a modern Prometheus, ready to share with the world the secrets of life and death, they see him only with superstitious eyes, as a man playing with forces that are sacrilegious and heretical. They expel him from the university, and he is forced to conduct his experiments again in his own laboratory. But his fiancée, Eloise, manages to pull him back into things by reminding him of their engagement. However, while he may have affection for Eloise, it seems he would also very much like the dowry ensured by marriage, which her father is none too happy about, proclaiming that while the two may become married, the betrothal contract guarantees that he shall see none of her money. Furious, he storms off into a nearby forest and becomes lost, until he sees a star fall from the sky and crash in said forest. He discovers that it is a small pod containing Krypton's final survivor. Well, not exactly. It seems baby Kal-El did not survive this time, left only as a skeleton and a message from Jor-El containing vast scientific knowledge, which Luthor is only too happy to take in. Using and disposing of a local grave robber for body parts, he takes advantage of the Kryptonian regeneration matrix to assemble himself a man made of cadavers, adorned in a metal sigil found inside of the craft. But once everything was finished, he had done it! His creation had life! Unfortunately, like the original story, Luthor rejects the grotesque Superman and accidentally sets his lab ablaze. And yet the creature saves him, flying him to safety before wandering off. Luthor begins a hunt for the creature, promising a reward for its destruction, fearful that his reputation would be ruined by the monstrosity. The monster even saved the life of Eloise, who saw in this creature a profound humanity that other people seemed to lack. And so the Superman eventually found himself in the company of the Kants, who had recently lost their son Klaus in a war. With kindness bestowed upon him, he was kind in turn, until Luthor's people located the creature and saw fit to try to murder him again. Unfortunately, in their zeal, this only resulted in the deaths of the Kants. Unluckily for Luthor, this was also the night of his wedding. The Superman monster crashed the party, and some ricocheted bullets hit Luthor's beloved Eloise. After subduing the monster with kryptonite, Luthor saw fit to try to resurrect his bride in the same manner as he had done with Superman. He succeeded, but Eloise was less than pleased with the results. Fortunately, Superman escaped Luthor's grasp once again, and he and Eloise decided to be together. Luthor eventually hunted the creatures to the Arctic, discovering their fortress of solitude, but eventually succumbed to the cold. He was found by Perry White, who also had Luthor's journal that explained these strange events. And the Superman monster himself carried off his human creator. Out of respect or love or hatred, it cannot be said, but they were never seen again.
The Superman monster reminds us that the most noble parts of humanity can be found in even the most monstrous of shapes. And personally speaking, I think the last son of Krypton looks better as a monster. I'm serving you a subpoena, my children. You have to appear in the court of Moarte on this day in October, where you will have to read more tales of supernatural law.
The main bulk of this one is made up of the titular story, Son of a Witch. It concerns this man, Marty Woodhull. He had hit on his employee, Susan, but she had rejected him. However, soon afterwards, she fell madly, obsessively in love with him. She continually harassed and bothered him until finally he was forced to fire her. According to Susan's lawyer, outspoken women's rights advocate Laura Michaels, Marty put a spell on her that made her fall in love with him.
Me personally, I would have encouraged video dating, but that's because I've had some success with it.
Marty, however, contends that he did not put that spell on her, but his mother did, who is a bona fide, ride-on-broomsticks, elderly crone, black cauldron witch. And indeed, that is true. She put the spell on Susan in the hopes that the poor boy would finally get some romance in his life, and now is refusing to lift the spell, not seeing that she's done anything wrong. What's more, she refuses to appear in court to testify that it was her spell that got Marty into this mess, terrified of what has traditionally happened to witches in courts in times past. Of course, with this case, everything has to become more and more complicated, especially since even Marty understands that love is not something that can be done via spell. It has to come naturally. Like how he has naturally fallen in love with his attorney, Alana Wolf. Everyone has their own agendas here, my children. Both sides are advocating for rights. Marty is in love with Alana, Marty's mother wants a normal life for him, and even her sisters have an agenda. The mother is finally willing to lift the spell, but she needs help from her sisters, who want her to go to court and be an advocate for witches' rights. While they have come far in 500 years, they still have a long way to go, and this situation is exactly what is called for in their minds. And so all these players are being pulled in so many directions. All of them are right and all of them are wrong. And I haven't even gotten into what's going on with Jeff Bird's kinda sorta not really model girlfriend, and how her current beau wants her to get information out of him and will extort her to do so. But fortunately these things have a habit of working out. In this case, the spell runs its course, and finally Susan no longer feels like she's in love with Marty. Hell, she just wants the whole matter resolved. And it seems her lawyer feels the same, for when Laura Michaels spots the witch of a mother, said witch can recognize right away who Laura was, and indeed who Marty was. For you see, the witch adopted Marty, finding him abandoned in a park. And well, Laura had to sacrifice quite a lot in her youth. And I think you get the picture. Also, there's a story about Mavis, their secretary, and how she gets into some shenanigans with a ghost and her boyfriend, and, well, lots of creatures who come to the office whom she lets use her pen to fill out forms. Lawyering is a complicated thing.
The counselors of the macabre once again bring us to the heart of the matter in cases like these. Mostly because that heart is on a mantelpiece that is dripping with blood. Horror does what Nintendo don't, my children. 2 years ago, we looked at a little story that was basically Wreck-It Ralph but with zombies. Let's see how that plays out with blast processing, shall we?
The arcade where everything played out has closed due to all the machines being burnt out. Even the cartridges attached to them have been fried. All except for Office Fighter 2, which is sold at a flea market by the arcade owner so they can make a few bucks. And within that cartridge, thanks to a battery standby, the last two survivors of the arcade apocalypse, Dee Dee and Zilla, struggle to stay warm in the bathroom stage of Office Fighter, since it's the only stage with a lock on the door. Unfortunately, the destruction of the arcade has not slowed the zombies, for in the stock exchange stage, background characters keep getting automatically generated and thus eaten up by zombie CEO Ken.
Hadouken your brains!
Zilla refuses to believe that his zombie friend could have been responsible for all this horror, but his outburst about the horrors they are experiencing attracts the attention of the zombies, who start busting down the door. Fortunately, the toilets also act as a warp zone, so the two just barely manage to escape onto the boss level for Office Fighter 2, alongside M. Bossin, the top-hatted final boss of Office Fighter 2. Fortunately, secret levels and characters are safe from the zombies. For the moment, anyway. Once the cartridge is plugged in, the whole level will be overrun. Their only hope is that, since the characters are all dead, M. Bossin will be the only playable character and be sent in for a match. He will fight whatever random zombie shows up, and since he is the boss character on the final stage, defeating the zombie will reset the game and erase all the zombies. And speaking of, the cartridge gets picked up by a boy who wants to use it to practice the game for the arcades so that he won't waste money trying to train against the other kids. But while he is confused about this whole thing, he still starts playing and has M. Bossin take on a zombie. Unfortunately, all the zombies seem to have glitched the game a bit, so when M. Bossin starts fighting a zombie, Team Battle Mode is activated and another zombie is selected to come help. And another. And another! And another! And all the zombies together have combined hit points, so even though M. Bossin is taking out zombies like a, well, boss, he barely does any damage to their hit points. Realizing how bad things are getting, Zilla and Dee Dee escape onto the innards of the cartridge. They figure they can activate the kill screen for the game, rolling over the score past its original limitations. It works, freezing the game, but the glitchiness allows the zombies to see and surround them. The kid can't reset the game, but he figures he might be able to make a little bit of cash by thawing out the game on his computer and posting the ROM on some pirating boards. And whatever will happen there is for another graphical upgrade.
16-bit Zombie continues the tale well, dangling the possibility of hope for the video game characters, and someday we'll see if that does ever come to pass. Or if there will simply be more digital deaths. Monstrous morning to you, my children. Need your car fixed? Trade in some old parts? Need some monsters killed? Well, maybe you should talk to the Basha brothers. In this, we kill monsters!
Jake and Andrew are brothers who run their own auto repair shop. Although it's not exactly doing well at the moment, They live in a small town after all, and there's only so much business they can run up. Their situation is not helped by the fact that Andrew used to date the local barkeep Vanessa. But Jake and Andrew are inseparable, and while Vanessa likes Jake, it feels more like she's dating the two of them instead of just Andrew. She has a new boyfriend now anyway, Dennis, who works for some cereal company. He's very successful too, which probably sweetens the deal for her. Although we won't talk about the sweetener in the cereal yet. Later that night, after Andrew finishes drinking for a while, he finds himself under attack by a monster. Jake tackles the beast, but gets his arm nice and chewed up as a result. Fortunately, Andrew manages to bash its head in with a shovel, which sobers him up pretty quickly. Although an even more sobering experience awaits Jake, for the brain juices of the monster soak into his arm and mutate it into a monster arm. They are chased home by another monster, unable to call for help since the creatures emit some sort of field that screws with electronic signals. They manage to hold themselves up in their garage, enhancing their truck to make it monster-proof in the meantime, since the creatures only emerge at night. Now being part monster himself, Jake has insight and knowledge about the creatures. Not necessarily where they came from, but he can sense their location. However, these new gifts come with a downside. He needs to drink monster brain juice to keep his arm from decaying. And considering how crappy he feels when he's decaying, who knows what's happening to the rest of him? After discovering a monster egg and leaving it with the sheriff, who is handling multiple calls about the creatures, they meet up with Vanessa and Dennis. Dennis is no jerk, loving Vanessa and wanting to help her however he can, and thanking the two for keeping her safe. They kill a flying monster, but this time drinking its brain juice transforms the arm into a different monster arm. Upon returning to town sometime later, however, they find the entire place deserted and wrecked, and a monster bunny stealing back the egg from the sheriff's office. Jake and Andrew go after it to get back the cooler the egg is in, since it was left behind by their now dead parents, and Dennis and Vanessa go home. But Vanessa spots the monster rabbit hand off the egg to Dennis, and she quickly ties him up. He refuses to explain, so she goes off to his cereal factory to investigate further. Everyone converges on the cereal factory, where Dennis explains what's really going on. The cereal company is just one of a dozen subsidiaries, all working together with the same goal: to produce cures for every disease. The monsters were manufactured to produce the cures to those diseases, but the more they produced cures, the larger and stronger they got. As did said cures, which made people stronger and smarter and better in general. And of course, the monster DNA is pretty damn strong, producing side effects in people that turn them into monsters too. Fortunately, they do have a cure, a pharmaceutical suppressant that people have to take every 2 weeks to stay human. The monsters decay too rapidly though, and are usually sterile, hence why they wanted the monster egg. And where does a cereal company fit into this plan to make the world better? Why, they were using it for distribution! To give people monster DNA throughout the world. The monsters were never meant to escape, but, well, you saw how big and strong they had become. The group does not think that this goal of making everyone dependent on a pharmaceutical to not turn into monsters is really that noble an undertaking, and so they fight Dennis, who transforms into a monster himself. Jake injects himself with more and more monster DNA to fight Dennis, the others even freeing the other monsters, until finally Dennis is sitting in the stomachs of several creatures, and Jake is back to normal thanks to the suppressant. Well, back to normal with the original monster arm anyway. And the three decide that maybe they should just get the hell out of the country and let someone else handle this, especially since they've got a year's supply of the suppressant that should hold out until Jake can be cured.
We Kill Monsters is in the same vein as Tremors, my children. A monster comedy with blue-collar workers dealing with everyday problems. And creatures that want to eat you. It's alive, my children! Already this season, we have taken a look at a direct adaptation of Dracula. But how about one for his rival and counterpart?
For those unfamiliar with the original novel, it is all told in flashback, a story written down by a sea captain named Roger Walton traveling through the Arctic until he came upon the near-dead body of Victor Frankenstein. Frankenstein tells Walton of his life and why he was in the Arctic, of the terrible things he created, on the price he has paid for it all. He tells of his early life and childhood, of the kind, educated maid, of his best friend, Henry Clerval, of Elizabeth, his cousin whom he fell in love with. Such things were more common and not quite as icky as we find today, my children. And he tells of his budding interest in natural science, and how the death of his mother helped spur him into studying the mysteries of life and death. As he studied at college, learning more about chemistry and anatomy and science, he desecrated tombs and performed hideous experiments to learn more and more about life and death. And his final grand experiment, to bring a dead body back to life. He succeeded in creating this thing, but upon looking at the thing he had spawned, he immediately rejected it, viewing it as a monster. He fled, collapsing in the streets thanks to his waning health. Time passed, and the monster vanished, and as Frankenstein's health returned, he eventually learned that his little brother, William, had been killed, and the maid accused of his murder. There was nothing to be done to save the poor maid. The evidence stacked against her, and so she was hung. Victor suspected that his creation, his monster, was somehow responsible for this. And he was correct, for the monster came to him and admitted his crimes. But the monster says that he is only what his creator made of him. From the moment he opened his eyes and looked upon Victor Frankenstein, he has been met with hatred and fear. And so hatred and fear are all he has ever known. In the hopes of inspiring some pity from the one he calls his father, he tells of what happened to him after Victor rejected him.
So we have a sea captain narrating a story about Victor, narrating a story about the monster, narrating a story.
Everywhere the monster traveled, he was met with disgust at his appearance. He found some solace alone in the woods, but he craved companionship, eventually locating a kind family living in a nearby cabin. He watched them from afar, learning language and hoping to eventually come to them as a friend and be accepted. His plan was to approach slowly, first with the blind grandfather. But the unexpected arrival of the rest, once again seeing him as a monster, forced him out and once more into rejection. After the encounter with young William that got him to murder the boy, over insults and his familial connection to Frankenstein, he framed the maid for the deed, and to help show Victor one thing: he will destroy everything Victor loves. But not if he does as he requests. He wants Victor to build for him a mate, a companion like himself, so that he may not be alone. After that, they will flee far away and leave humanity to itself. Victor does as instructed, at first, but eventually decides to destroy the mate before it can come to life, fearing unleashing another monster into the world. The monster murders Elizabeth in retaliation, and so Frankenstein spends the rest of his life hunting the monster, chasing him all the way to the Arctic, where Captain Walton found him. And after Victor finishes his story, he succumbs to a sleep that he never awoke from. The monster comes to look upon his dead creator one last time, despite threats from Captain Walton, but he reassures him that his evil is done. Frankenstein was his last victim, and there is no greater revenge against the monster than letting him live in pain and loneliness.
While more stylized than the complete Dracula, this dark graphic novel lives up to its name, and the legacy left by Mary Shelley. Emerge from the fog to fight a thing, my children!
John Carpenter has himself quite a reputation with horror movies.
But how does he fare when he puts together an anthology comic book?
And like all good anthologies, we have ourselves a horror host.
Can't imagine why I'm happy to see one of those, my children.
In this case, it is the grounds creeper, who of course brings us, in prosy ways and less sequential arty, 6 stories of people buried beneath the graves he cares for. The first was written by John Carpenter himself, a little tale of the quantum state of dead or not dead in The Ghost Maker. Our narrator here, now in an asylum, writes out the events of Halloween night 5 years prior. He was a scientist visiting a former friend of his for some brandy. They had fallen out due to their differences of approach, and we see one such questionable approach as our narrator drinks some drugged brandy. His friend claims that he can use universally accepted scientific principles to create a ghost. He just does not mention that our narrator will be the guinea pig, as, based on the concept of Schrodinger's cat, our narrator is put into a state of both death and life, so that he comes face to face with his own ghost. Next up is a little story of seasickness called At Sea, where a group of friends are sailing to Hawaii, but one soon falls ill. A dark shadow seems to come into the cabin at night while he's resting, and soon one of the others gets injured investigating the shadow. One by one, the group are killed, with a strange injury in the back of their heads. The lone survivor desperately tries to reach Hawaii, finally spotting it in the distance to his relief, but also to the relief of Cthulhu here, who clearly needs a rest of his own. Third up is a tale of revenge from beyond the grave, or rather, right inside of it. 2 criminals are digging up a grave on behalf of a crime boss, trying to steal a diamond ring from the body, only to discover a limo has been placed in the grave. But when they open the sunroof, something pulls one in. Telling their boss about it later, the survivor leads him and his goons to the grave to see what happened. And of course, all end up inside of it, with our survivor walking away at least with a ring of their own. Speaking of criminals, here is another story of some. A cheerful, well-read man meets with his own boss after a job. That one was more successful, with all 3 surviving, aside for a bullet in the leg at least. They had rested for the night in an odd structure, but when they decided to depart, they found that they had invaded the home of some hungry insects. Our storyteller just barely got out alive. But the funny thing about the insect's tendency to eat you alive, you can't actually feel it happening. On the subject of feeling things, this story features a man who felt he had nothing left to live for. Until he was in the act of suicide anyway. He was just able to call 911 to save himself, but it seems he now has a squatter in his own body. Yes, a demon has possessed his body during the brief time he was dead, and the two go through a battle of wits and endurance to try to take final possession of the body. Who wins out? Well, let's just say hell is nice this time of year. And finally we have a story that's not as impressive or as original as the others, but of course is still full of murder and mayhem. A poor woman spots a more luxurious woman be mugged and killed on the streets, as she screams that her attackers don't want her possessions. They're cursed! And that indeed seems to be the case, as our poor protagonist takes a ring off her body that she can feel is full of magic and power. Not realizing, of course, that where she goes with the ring, death follows. Until it results in her own, of course.
John Carpenter's Tales for a Halloween Night delivers exactly what they promise. Spooky tales, either written by or recommended by someone who knows all too well how to scare you this Halloween. There was a hole here, but it's gone now, my children. So that Linkara guy actually reviewed this rather good Silent Hill comic years and years ago in a tiny video for someone else's live stream. But nobody remembers that, so here I am to do it right.
Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a can of gas. No, really! Meet Jack the Pup Stanton and his girlfriend Jill on their way up the road to Silent Hill and stopping at a gas station. But Jill has some romantic history that might get in the way of their little trip. Namely that she is the wife of Jack's boss, a crime boss who frequently sends Jack out to murder people. Jack's former employer dispatches 3 goons to retrieve them both alive, but a friendly gas station attendant helps Jack evade capture. Although Jill is not so lucky, being stuffed into a car by the last goon, who heads towards our favorite town in the world. Jack pursues, eventually finding the goon, or rather his body, along with the bloody interiors of a car and some visions of desiccated dogs. But while the monsters of the story are a bit recycled, Jack has himself a history with dogs. You see, his father was kind of a creepy asshole who believed that guns were what America was really all about.
Well, that's just silly, my children. We all know what keeps America strong. Milk, the Constitution, and horror stories.
And so at a young age, his father shoved a gun into his hands and told him to shoot a puppy right between the eyes, which he did so. But enough about the past for now. There's plenty of time for that later. The present is what concerns Jack now, particularly when he is attacked by a closer monster. Fortunately, he is armed and kills the creature. But Jill comes running out in a nurse's outfit, screaming that he did not kill a monster, and that they will never escape from their victims. They're all here in Silent Hill, and that all Jack knows how to do is kill and kill and kill. Losing her again in that confusion, Jack finds himself another woman in the town, Sarah, in the process of being crucified by some monsters. He rescues her, and they go off in pursuit of their respective targets, her parents and his lovely Jill. Recalling the nurse costume she wore, Jack thinks they should go to Brookhaven Hospital for her. And indeed he finds her amidst a collection of dead monsters on gurneys. But they don't appear as monsters to Sarah. And they are the last people that Jack killed before he fled with Jill. In fact, he killed Sarah as well. He didn't mean to kill her, but it wasn't exactly an accident either. She had stumbled upon him during the assassination, and he required no witnesses. And now she, and a group of nurses, are more than a little ready to get some payback. For him, it was nothing personal, just a job. But it certainly was not. It was a family. Not that Jack would ever understand the concept. His father said that Jack was born to be a killer. And while that may have been his dream, Jack made it his own personal nightmare a long time ago. Jack tries to say Jill is innocent in all of this, but Sarah rejects that. She benefited from the murder and evil and knew full well what her more lavish lifestyle had cost. There is one way to redeem themselves, though, and Jill decides to take that opportunity, having seen the reflection of her own soul, and allows the nurses to kill her. Jack is not so prepared to throw in the towel and flees back onto the streets, and right into the path of his boss, who had followed him into Silent Hill. He's ready to end Jack, but the town decides that this one is not so open to redemption and makes the choice for him, allowing a certain geometrical creature to handle him. And thus it was down to Jack, alone, and with his final chance for redemption, he takes it.
Jack and Jill went to Silent Hill to flee from their transgressions. Jack fell down because he shot his crown, and they both went up to heaven. monstrous morning to you, my children! If there's one thing you should take away from these terrifying tales I tell year after year, it's that monsters should be feared, respected, but also, they have rights too, you know.
Welcome to Kaiju Max Prison, my children. Although this is certainly no place for children, as can be attested by new arrival Electrogore. The only thing he cares about is finding some way to keep his own children safe. After all, he was only attacking human cities to gather the electricity they need to feed on. The warden of Kaiju Max, though, Kang, would love nothing more than to find his children and bring them here too. All kaiju deserve this kind of treatment in his mind. And of course, you'd probably agree if you were to meet the residents of Kaiju Max yourself. Mafia leaders like Ape Whale, electricity and uranium addicts. And well, let's not even mention the cryptids. Although there are some who want a better way of thinking, like Mechazon and the other mechanical kaiju, who fight their own programming to become pacifists. But they're not very popular amongst the other residents. As said, Electrogore wants nothing else but to find some way of keeping his children safe. Some way of letting them know what happened to him and to get food to them. He at first is encouraged to get help from the cryptids, though he soon discovers how much of a mistake that was. Some of the kinder human guards encourage him to tell them anyway that it really is not so bad in here, and that the world is changing, that kaiju are not the dominant species anymore, and that it is too complicated for them out there, and they'd better get with the times if they want to survive. But then, who can trust the humans, eh? One's a uranium dealer himself, who also has gambling debts to the Queen of the Moon. The sympathetic human doctor has Stockholm Syndrome with a real nasty monster called Zon. Manipulative, sociopathic, and well, don't turn your back on him near the bathing waterfall. Ape Whale, in the meantime, has been having his own problems. He and his group have ruled over Japan for so long. They are the king of the kaiju food chain. But he has enemies all around him, and his son, Woofy, is quite a bit of a disappointment to him. No aggressive spirit at all. He just wants to play and have fun on the island. And play he does, as he meets up with a small human child who seems to appear and disappear at will. A human child who at first just wants to play, but then wants him to play a prank on Ape Whale by putting some dangerous plants into his drink. And when he finally acquiesces, is a little Boy Scout on his shoulder telling him how to run the mafia he has inherited, by getting them to distrust each other. Things just keep going badly for Electrogore. People he thinks he can open up to and be friends with betray his confidence or take advantage of him, particularly because of his natural ability to produce weapons-grade uranium bubbles from his back. He finally does have something of an ally in the Green Humongo, who has a way to escape involving the electricity he abuses. But why the hassle? The fugitive life is no life at all. Still, Electrogore needs out, and Humongo is happy to help. Does he find his children? Well, that's for next season.
Kaiju Max shows us the darker side of giant monsters. Not the human casualties, of course, we all knew about that, but the all-too-human pain inside a giant, rampaging force of destruction. Trick or treat, my children! While we wait for the eventual sequel to the cult favorite and all-around Halloween-tastic film Trick or Treat, why not enjoy a 4-story anthology from its original creator and other comic creators?
Unlike the original film, the stories do not weave in and out of each other, all taking place on a single night. but are instead four tales from across time, dealing with this most auspicious and glorious times of the year, as told to us by a grandfather carving a pumpkin while trying to encourage his granddaughter to enjoy Halloween and not be scared by it. The first story, Seed, brings us to Ireland in the 1640s, where Minister Thomas offers prayers for witches burnt at the stake. The soldiers responsible for the burnings are led by Commander Wulfric, who believes such people are undeserving of their prayers, that God requires soldiers to fight and kill on his behalf. And yet Thomas can find nothing but sympathy for these people being tortured and eventually slain for their supposed crimes. He questions one witch named Bridget privately, trying to understand their beliefs contrasted with his own. They believe in honoring spirits of those who have passed, offering crops as gifts, and dress in disguise from the dark forces that prowl the night. Bridget wanted to go to the New World and plant a seed there so that their magic could survive, begging Thomas to do it for her, since it is clear that she will be dead soon. Eventually, he is moved by this woman to try to help her escape, but they are recaptured. Although not before the seed is planted and a pumpkin grows, the seeds of that pumpkin being taken to the New World. Magic has a way of working out in ways unexpectedly, but still to the benefit. And spirits will be appeased and rise anew with the harvest moon on Samhain. Jumping ahead to 1853, we have Corn Maiden. A group of settlers, including a girl named Sarah and her father, who is leading the expedition, are building a railroad that should hopefully ensure profits and a comfortable future for Sarah. At least until they come across a Native American settlement right in their path. Sarah's father tries to negotiate with them, while Sarah befriends a native girl, learning about the legend of the Corn Maiden from her, their guardian and protector who blesses the tribe with fertile lands. The girl even gives Sarah a doll representing a spirit who will protect her from evil. One that might not be good himself, but is old and powerful. The tribe refuses to budge from that spot, and eventually Sarah's father decides to take advantage of his daughter's friendship with the tribe, giving her poisoned food to celebrate Halloween with them. He's willing to sacrifice his own daughter to have this land. He succeeds in killing off the tribe this way, but the Corn Maiden and the spirit who would protect her have a way of bringing things around again. Next up is Echoes in 1955. We meet private detective Jake Perkins, who cares not for Halloween because of the real-life terrors around him. Like the mayor who constantly prattles on TV about witchcraft and devilry all around people and how they need to be afraid of it. A woman named Lily comes to Perkins for help, wanting to find her twin sister Beth, missing for over a week. His investigation brings him to Knickerbocker Studios, who are putting on a little cult play to honor their fallen sisters who have been killed by a local serial killer, including Beth. Using the magic of their old-time rituals, they reveal things about Perkins himself that allows him to track the serial killer back to his lair and defeats him in battle. Revealed to be the mayor himself, since people like him are always looking for a scapegoat for their own crimes. Funny story about Beth, though. She is an only child, no twin, and her full name was Elizabeth Lillian Kyle, and she has been dead for a week now. And finally we have Monster Mash. No specific date given for this one, but it preoccupies two boys, Rory and James, who want to have one last night of fun being kids together on Halloween. Rory's father, the local minister, however, does not approve of this holiday or the mischief they get up to, and expresses his distaste by slapping his son. The two are saved from any more punishment from this man, though, by the arrival of monsters surrounding them. but the monsters do not see them as humans as long as they keep their masks on. Well, aside from the Grim Reaper, who takes the two to a gathering of the monsters, a celebration of the season. And so they have their last night together, partying it up, leaving candy for children. Although the longer Rory wears his mask, the more monstrous he becomes. And finally the monsters come to Rory's father's church, where said father is still nothing but judgmental, not a hint of sympathy for his own son. In response, Rory says he'd rather be a monster than a man like him. Rory says farewell to James so that he can go with the monsters, traveling with the Grim Reaper elsewhere. And with the stories over, the grandfather finally convinces his granddaughter to go out and have some Halloween fun. Good timing too, since James here wants to spend some time with Rory. They haven't seen each other for quite a while.
This trick-or-treat smells not like feet, but it is something good to eat. Hellish hello to you, my children! It is October 30th, known as Devil's Night. How appropriate, then, that we have a very long story to cover. One that's from hell. This is the story of Jack the Ripper, my children. Or rather, a theory about Jack the Ripper that, well, most people have discarded, including the writer Alan Moore. However, it does make the stuff of a compelling little story. A conspiracy theory involving the Queen of England and other members of the royal family. It's not a mystery story at all. It comes out and tells you right away who Jack the Ripper was. Sir William Gull, a royal physician who knew how to take care of problems for Her Majesty. We even get to see Gull's life as he grows up, and how fascinated he was with dissecting small animals and playing with corpses even at a young age. He constantly talks about how he feels God intends some sort of grand purpose for him and for everyone else, though it takes him a while to discover his own. And why the Ripper murders? Well, to begin, Prince Albert Victor had himself a little affair with a commoner, not that she knew who he was, named Annie Crook, and fathered a child with her, mostly thanks to his friend Walter Sickert introducing the two. Annie Crook is placed in an insane asylum and operated on to keep her from talking, while Albert's daughter is given to Annie's parents. However, a local prostitute, Marie Kelly, knows about the royal baby and what happened between the prince and Annie Crook. She and a group of other prostitutes are in need of money due to some extortion foisted upon them and decide to blackmail Walter Sickert with the information. And Sickert himself already feels sick over the entire thing. Because Sickert has no money, he is forced to bring this matter to the attention of the Queen, who takes it upon herself to once more hire Gull to settle things. As you might imagine from a man so casually committed to creating murder and destroying people, Gull does not believe that killing these women is but a simple job for the Queen. No, murder itself is far too common a thing. This is a grand work. Their deaths must be full of symbol and myth and power, and killing them is not about just doing work for the Queen, but rather a ritual to keep womankind from dominating men, preventing them from ever gaining power. He speaks of the history of supposed matriarchies, of women worshipped as mother goddesses for being able to produce children, of the history of London and so-called reason and rational thinking that is nothing but elitism, sexism, and important symbols by the Freemasons. Gull does not seem to grasp the irony of the fact that he is only doing this because a matriarch ordered him to do so, but whatever. As you might imagine from someone so morally criminal and, well, believing that murders are a way to keep women from taking power, he is not exactly sane himself.
Not that I am saying this should all be ignored, my children. The purpose of all of this is to get into the mind of Dr. Gull, the Ripper, and why he commits his grisly crimes. Hell, most of his explanation I have given you encompasses but the first few chapters of From Hell. The book is far too dense a work to really get into in our mere short time, my children, and better still experienced by you firsthand. I regularly spoil these things because, of course, you can still enjoy most comics, even when I have told you the major plot points, simply because a summary is no substitute for experiencing these works head-on. But in this case, there is too much to cover, too many details and characters to leave for a mere summary. And let's face it, most of you are more interested in just figuring out who Jack the Ripper was and why he did it. But for those among my children more preoccupied with the fine details, like Dr. Gull himself, it is probably best you pick up the large tome and read more for yourself. What becomes of the good doctor, his confidant, the Jack the Ripper letters, and all those other little things that make the good doctor someone from hell.
Fact or fiction? Well, undoubtedly fiction. From Hell is a study in terror, my children. One man's terror. The terror of an entire city. And the terror we feel even now with a name that lived beyond him. Happy Halloween, my children! Oh, we are long overdue to discuss stories from these franchises. Whether we are hunted by forces beyond our comprehension, or our bodies used for horrific procreation, whoever wins, we lose. It's Aliens versus Predator. We actually have ourselves something of a double feature, my children. The first Alien vs. Predator story is actually a short 3-part story told across 3 issues of Dark Horse Presents. We see the aliens producing their eggs, predators readying themselves for the hunt, and the battle that occurs in this match made in hell. Also, the entire time there is narration between 2 humans who are discussing ideas like manifest destiny, evolution, nature, and whether or not humanity has any right to intrude upon such things, especially since humanity has a great track record for being awful. Yes, the human race is rife with imperfection, but clearly we're doing something right because we made a story where 2 alien races stab each other.
The main miniseries of Aliens vs. Predator brings us to the planet Ryushi, where a UFO crashes at high noon with no one around to witness its planetfall. There is a colony of humans here, overseen by a relatively new arrival, Machiko Noguchi, who is having a hard time getting the people who work under her to respect her and see her as the boss, not her departing predecessor. She's too rigid to buy the book for them. Unfortunately, she has bigger problems ahead of her. Aside from an inspection from the company, it seems some of the animals they've been rounding up have gotten sick. And one of the ranchers locates a strange creature that loves to give hugs. And that same rancher decides to investigate further and finds out that there are some poachers arriving. They give chase, but in doing so, he rams his small craft into theirs, destroying both vessels, and himself in the process. Although the predators don't seem to mind too much that they lost their ride. Later, the humans find the wreckage of the predator ship, even a predator survivor, whom they take back to camp. However, in doing so, they lead the other predators back to town, and they get to work on said town. Noguchi gets as many people as she can into the main town, turning it into a fortress. but carelessness and accidents do happen, especially when it comes to open doors. And xenomorph aliens stampeding inside. Yes, it is here that she understood what was really at stake here. Two alien races locked in combat, and humanity was merely an innocent bystander, ready to be collateral casualties in this war.
Considering what the Predators do, I think we can truly say that this is, in fact, a bug hunt.
The rescued predator, Broken Tusk, allies himself with the humans who saved him, loosely communicating to them using voice clips of the people talking. It all comes down to Machiko and the Predator, storming Alien Central to crash an orbiting barge down on the evacuated city, hopefully eradicating all the remaining xenomorphs. Unfortunately, Broken Tusk is killed in the effort, though he gives Machiko a mark to signify her place with the other Predators. 2 years later, in a follow-up special issue, the other Predators return and learn what happened to Broken Tusk's bug hunt, and are all too happy to let Machiko join in on the next hunt.
So we again say our farewells, my children. For now, anyway. The stories never end. They change, they are adopted and revised and expanded and contracted, but never do they end. I will see you all again when the seasons change once more. We all see each other again. So farewell for now.